Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, fallout from the Baltimore bridge collapse. Norfolk is expected to see an increase in port traffic and changes in cruise ship itineraries. Norfolk and Newport News residents have long complained about coal dust from nearby rail terminals affecting their quality of life.
It just hurts to be unheard for that long. It just takes away from the trust of the public.
And WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh details how local sailors are part of a quickly mobilized convoy now on its way to Gaza to provide food and supplies ahead of what some are calling imminent famine. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. The Port of Baltimore is closed after the collapse of the Key Bridge. It's now blocking the main shipping channel, and that means more business at the ports of Virginia and at the cruise terminal in Norfolk. Here's WHRO's Laura Fillion with the port story.
A container ship hit a bridge outside Baltimore early Tuesday, shutting down all vessel traffic in the Patapsco River. Ships stuck outside the harbor will have to go somewhere to unload their cargo. The Port of Virginia says it's ready to help. Spokesperson Joe Harris said the port has the capacity and experience to handle surges in ship traffic. The ship that hit the bridge in Baltimore stopped at Virginia International Gateway last week and left without incident. Laura Fillion, WHRO News.
Next, WHRO's Ryan Murphy reports on how downtown Norfolk is bracing for several weeks of unexpected cruise ship arrivals and departures.
Carnival Cruise Line announced late Tuesday it would move its operations from Baltimore to Norfolk as crews continued cleanup efforts of the collapsed Key Bridge. Officials say roughly 3,600 passengers will disembark in Norfolk this Sunday and board buses to get them back to Baltimore. The next set of passengers will board the ship here and embark on the next 7-day cruise Sunday night. Officials say Carnival is planning for a cruise arrival and departure every Sunday at least through the end of April. Norfolk was preparing to start renovating its cruise terminal in the next couple of weeks to accommodate larger ships. Carnival is planning to start year-round cruise service out of the city next year. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Sailors from the USS Bataan returned home last week from the Middle East. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh says sailors had to figure out a new kind of war.
USS Bataan returned to Naval Station Norfolk after an 8-month deployment. The USS Carter Hall pulled into Little Creek. Navy Secretary Carlos del Toro was on hand to greet the 1,000 sailors on the Bataan who were in the Red Sea and off the coast of Israel.
The mission that they fulfilled in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea is actually something that has not been seen since World War II. And I'm so proud of our Navy and our Marine Corps.
Earlier in the week, Marines from Camp Lejeune arrived ahead of their ships. A total of 4,000 sailors and Marines were part of the Amphibious Ready Group, which saw its mission abruptly shift when war broke out in Gaza in October. While in the Red Sea, the Bataan fired missiles at drones launched by Houthi rebels. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Norfolk and Newport News residents have long complained about coal dust from nearby rail terminals and how it affects people's health and homes. They say the state hasn't taken enough action. Now WHRO's Catherine Hefner reports the communities are trying to act locally.
When Malcolm Jones hung out in the Lamberts Point neighborhood as a kid, he noticed what appeared like an ever-present sheen of dirt or dust covering everything in sight. Now that he's grown up, he knows what it is, coal dust from the nearby export terminal.
The coal dust is very visible on cars, on doors, on houses. You leave anything outside for a couple of days and you can see coal dust residue on it.
Coal is brought in by train to the massive Norfolk Southern terminal that borders the neighborhood. There, it's loaded onto ships headed around the world. In the meantime, it sits in open, uncovered rail cars. Jones says that allows the dust to spread.
There's times of the day where you can see clouds of dust, especially when they're dropping the load off of the train.
Coal dust is full of toxic metals that are dangerous to people's health and can cause asthma or heart disease. In Lamberts Point, there's not a lot of official data showing these health effects, But residents say it's clear from their own experiences. Jones says when people move away, they notice a big difference.
They had lived in the area for 20, 30 years and had asthma problems the whole time they were here. They left the area and improvement happened.
For decades, Lambert's Point and Southeast Newport News have asked for help controlling the coal dust. Both neighborhoods are majority black. Now a community activist, Jones says it feels like officials have repeatedly ignored their concerns.
It just hurts to be unheard for that long. It just takes away from the trust of the public.
The Environmental Protection Agency recently reiterated how dangerous air pollution is from small particles like coal dust. Christina Fernandez is with the EPA's Mid-Atlantic region.
It's the cause of a lot of premature deaths, hospitalizations, and impacts vulnerable communities like children and elderly.
The agency just announced tighter regulations of this pollution, but the new rules likely won't affect Lambert's Point. Because the Norfolk Southern Terminal was built before modern air regulations, it's not subject to them. The other larger issue is that regulators have limited data about air pollution in Virginia. There are just 17 federal monitors across the whole state due to limited resources. According to those monitors, Virginia already meets the new standards. But critics say that could miss whole swaths of the state, including potential air pollution hotspots like Southeast Newport News. Attorney Aaron Isherwood with the Sierra Club says Hampton Roads can't keep waiting for more data.
I think we all know that there's a problem there, and the community has been waiting a long time for some action.
The first step is getting more local monitoring. The EPA knows it's needed, especially in vulnerable areas. The agency gave Virginia a grant several years ago to set up air monitors in Norfolk and Newport News. Those haven't yet been installed. In the meantime, the state's giving some in the community their own less powerful air sensors to keep an eye on air quality in their backyards. One of those sensors is at Pray First Mission Ministries in Southeast Newport News. Pastor Nathaniel Kurtz points out the small device attached to a shed behind the church. It's made by a company called Purple Air.
And right here is the Purple Air sensor.
Kurtz says the new monitoring is a good first step, but he's still skeptical the state will take meaningful action. He's part of a group called Coal Dust Kills that's now pushing for a new local ordinance in Newport News. They want the city to regulate coal dust as a public nuisance and require physical protections that have been used elsewhere. That could include tall wind fences to curb dust or a dome covering the giant coal piles. State officials say it's premature to consider those strategies until they analyze the data. But Kurtz says there's too much at stake to wait.
Time isn't on our side when it comes to health and environmental justice, because the longer that we wait, there's one more toddler that's breathing coal dust ash into their lungs.
In the meantime, his church is planning to open a daycare. He hopes their new air sensor can at least help determine when it's safe for the kids to play outside. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
If I mention the $150 million Laskin Road widening project in Virginia Beach, are you thinking, yeah, another delay? Well, that would be correct. As WHRO's Ryan Murphy reports, it's now unclear when it will be done.
Contractors have told the Virginia Department of Transportation they'll need until at least next year to complete work on Laskin Road that's been going on since 2019. And that's after the completion was delayed once already, from the original wrap date in the spring of 2023 to this spring. VDOT spokesman Tim Kelly says issues with unexpected utilities and soil conditions have slowed work and even required redesigning some elements.
Those impacts have continued to kind of ripple into the project schedule.
Kelly says VDOT's figuring out when contractors will be able to finish. It'll be sometime in 2025, but they're not sure exactly when. The delay also means the cost of the project will go up again. Kelly says it's too early to know for sure by how much. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Suffolk is one of the fastest growing cities in the Commonwealth, and it's suffering growing pains. The city is struggling with when and where to open a new early voting site. WHRO's Laura Fillion covered the story.
Councilmember Roger Fawcett brought up concerns about absentee voting at a February meeting.
This year being that the election is going to be presidential year, the voter expectations are probably going to be much larger than normal.
Right now, Suffolk residents who want to vote early or absentee can only do it at the registrar's office downtown. In the 2020 presidential election, 30,000 people voted absentee in Suffolk. Council can't agree on where to open another early voting site. It has to meet state standards, and the city's registrar says it'll take longer than 8 months to get a new site up and running. Laura Fillion, WHRO News.
We're all using more energy, and local officials met this week to talk about how the region needs to plan for that growth. WHRO's Catherine Hafner covered that story.
There are several things driving up energy demand. A growing number of data centers in Virginia use massive amounts of electricity. And to fight climate change, the country's working to power things like cars and appliances with electricity instead of fossil fuels. The Hampton Roads Alliance works on economic development. Energy Director Matt Smith says the region has to plan how it will meet this new demand.
If we go forward with the status quo, we won't be able to maintain the status quo necessarily regarding quality of life or growth.
Alliance President Doug Smith says local officials have a key role to play because they determine how our land gets used, including for energy infrastructure.
All those decisions, while they're really important to the region, they're going to get impacted by just local land use decisions.
For instance, planning commissions and city councils often have final say on projects like solar farms or battery storage. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Chesapeake City Council member Don Carey, who switched political parties from Republican to Democrat, says he will challenge Mayor Rick West in November's mayoral election. WHRO's Barry Graham had that story.
Carey said he's making the switch after realizing the notions and values he thought Republicans stood for seemed to no longer be the case. Carey was first elected to city council in 2020 and is a former NFL player. Carey was not endorsed when the Chesapeake GOP voted on its official slate of local office candidates in January. Local elections in Chesapeake are nonpartisan, though the backing of parties is evident through sample ballots that are passed out at polling places. Carey already has the backing of House of Delegates Speaker Don Scott. Barry Graham, WHRO News.
More than half of North Carolina's public school buildings were built before the federal government began regulating lead. With federal funding this year, all public schools statewide will be required to test for lead and asbestos. WUNC's Liz Schlemmer has more on how that's going at a 100-year-old school building in Durham.
Walking into the Maureen Joy Charter School building is a little like stepping back in time. The lacquered wood floors creak as students walk to class. Sunlight streams across high ceilings. The school's chief operating officer, Samantha Amaral, offers a tour of the building.
It was built in 1910. So this is a historic building, and we love it. And you'll see some really cool photos in the front of the lobby of what it looked like back in 1910.
From the black and white photograph, the street view of the school looks unchanged. But Maureen Joy Charter School renovated the old Y.E. Smith Public School building in 2012 before moving in.
They redid all of the piping, all of the paint, and all of that. So all that was left was really the skeleton of the school.
Amaral says she hopes that means the school doesn't have to worry as much about lead in the water. But administrators still wanted to check. She looked into water testing a few years ago.
Yeah, it's just expensive.
She says a testing company quoted hundreds of thousands of dollars, beyond what the school could afford.
I mean, and then, like, God forbid we find something, then that just encourages even more cost, right?
Then this year, Amaral got an email from the Department of Public Instruction. It said that all public schools, including charter schools, would be required to test their drinking water for lead and paint for asbestos. The good news was that federal funds would foot the bill. The program is called Clean Classrooms for Carolina Kids.
I was like, this can't be real. So you're mandating this, and you're bringing support, and you're giving us a step-by-step direction, and you're making it super easy for us. Where's the catch? And there isn't any.
Schools simply sign up and mail in test samples. The school's maintenance director, Raymond Melvin, shows me how he collected water from drinking fountains. First, he opens a sterile bottle.
Well, basically, I'm filling the bottle right up until the neck of the bottle.
Then he goes to the next tap and does the same.
Then I'm going to put it back into this bag to where we're going to ship it.
He samples every source of drinking water in the building.
Lead in the water is never acceptable, first of all, okay? So the process is we send it into them. They basically tell us whether there's lead in the water. Then we work together as a partnership to resolve that issue.
The partnership is with RTI International, a nonprofit based in Research Triangle Park. They're working with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services to use $150 million in American Rescue Plan funding for the testing.
This is once-in-a-generation funding.
That's Jennifer Hopenick-Redman, director of the Clean Classrooms program at RTI.
Our overall goal is to both identify and eliminate exposure to lead and asbestos hazards where North Carolina children learn and play. And we have funds to do it, so it's free. We're not just finding a problem. Our goal is to help fix the problem.
She says the problems that lead can cause are central to a child's ability to learn.
Basically, as children are exposed to lead, it can cause behavioral and learning difficulties as well as other issues.
Clean Classrooms for Carolina Kids aims to enroll 3,100 public schools across the state.
So every public school in North Carolina.
And it will test every tap in those schools. Here's Redman.
If we find a tap that has detectable lead, sometimes the tap right next to it's totally fine. And that's why it's really important to test every tap.
The program is still working to enroll every school across the state by May 1st, so they can complete testing before the federal funding expires. I'm Liz Schlemmer.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
One of Governor Youngkin's big ideas, a Northern Virginia arena for basketball's Wizards and hockey's Capitals, is dead. The city of Alexandria is now saying no thanks, and Caps owner Ted Leonsis now has a deal to stay in D.C. and refurbish the present Capital One arena. Virginia Public Media's Jod Khalil has more.
Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin has been championing the project since December. It would have had the state finance and entertainment district centered around moving the Washington Wizards and Capitals to Alexandria. He said it was a great deal that would have brought $12 billion in economic impact and tens of thousands of jobs to Virginia. But on Wednesday, Alexandria Mayor Justin Wilson said they were pulling out of the deal.
We have come to the conclusion that the General Assembly process is not going to produce a proposal that protects our financial responsibilities and respects our community's values.
Already, the legislative avenues for bringing the teams to Virginia had closed one by one. The Senate killed the proposal, not once, but twice, and then it didn't make it into the state budget as an amendment. In a response to Alexandria's statement, Youngkin blamed, quote, the personal and political agendas for sinking the deal. He congratulated Monumental, the company that owns the two teams, but said he was sorry they wouldn't be in Virginia. The arena deal has been a big part of budget negotiations in Virginia. Now it's off the table as a bargaining chip for both Republicans and Democrats. Jod Khalil, VPM News.
A new citizen science project hopes to document sightings of otters in the Elizabeth River. WHRO's Catherine Hafner is back with that story.
Otters had mostly disappeared from the Elizabeth when it was heavily polluted, but there have been more sightings of the creatures in recent years. Mary Bennett with the Elizabeth River Project says they now want hard data about the otters,
so that we can actually say for certain how they're coming back and how they're thriving.
The new project is partnered with the National River Otter Ecology Project. Director Megan Isidore recently visited Norfolk to teach people how to spot and document otters.
They make huge ripples in the water, and they make a lot of bubbles. So if you're looking along a riverbank, you're going to want to look at gravel areas. How many toes on that one? 5. Are there claws? Yes. Yes.
Isidore says it's important to learn more about how otters live in an urban watershed like Norfolk. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Army and Navy vessels are headed for Gaza, hoping to deliver up to 2 million meals a day. Mobilized quickly, the units left the U.S. with several questions unanswered as experts say thousands of Palestinians in Gaza face imminent famine. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh has the story.
Boats from the Army's 7th Transportation Brigade left the dock playing the Imperial March from Star Wars. An unusual choice for a little-known Army unit, now on a high-profile mission to deliver food aid to Gaza. Colonel Sam Miller.
This is U.S. Army watercraft's moment, and we are up for it.
the U.S. and the world will see our humanitarian capability on display and in action forward.
The first Army vessel left Virginia less than 2 days after President Biden announced in his State of the Union address that the U.S. would build a mobile pier to ferry aid to Gaza. When the last boats cast off from Virginia, there were still large unanswered questions about the military-led effort.
I'm primarily focused on our capabilities getting out of here and then getting there and getting this built. And then they'll give me further orders from there.
It will take the relatively small flat-bottom Army boats a month to reach the eastern Mediterranean. The Navy is bringing a football field-size floating dock to be assembled 3 miles out at sea. Ships will bring supplies into the dock, and then barges will take them to the pier on shore. The U.S. built something similar for a relief effort in Haiti in 2010, but nothing in a potential war zone. The president has committed to have no U.S. troops set foot in Gaza. The U.S. is trying to line up a private contractor to anchor the pier to the beach and distribute the food. Army Brigadier General Brad Hinson.
Our number one priority for every deployment is the protection of our soldiers. That is number one. I'm not going to go into details of the protection capabilities that we will have when we get over into our final destination.
A bipartisan group of congressmen has urged the White House to provide more details before the equipment arrives. The Navy's ships carrying military equipment have also left. The larger ships can cross the Atlantic in half the time of the smaller Army boats. President Biden promised to have the operation running by early May, giving the U.S. time to figure out some of the details and continue to push for a ceasefire.
Obviously, a ceasefire would be welcomed in Gaza in order to be able to bring humanitarian aid to the beach in a more successful manner.
Navy Secretary Carlos del Toro was in Norfolk for a homecoming of the USS Baton, which has just returned from the region.
This is a plan that's being laid out right now in close cooperation with Israel. So I have every confidence that we will be providing the necessary security that will be necessary to protect our sailors, while at the same time provide the international community that really needs to come to the help of Gaza.
The Air Force has airdropped more than 35,000 meals and 31,000 bottles of water into northern Gaza. The Army estimates a mobile pier operation could allow the U.S. to bring in 2 million meals a day. The Army has built mobile piers since World War II when they were island hopping in the Pacific with the Navy and Marines. As the military loaded one of the last ships, Major Katie Keller was overseeing the loading. She says they practice moving this equipment frequently.
So we have quite a few different entities, different personnel, and we are working 24/7 to ensure we can get there as quickly as possible to assist.
For starving people in Gaza, the aid can't come soon enough. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from WHRO's Steve Walsh, Catherine Hafner, Laura Fillion, Ryan Murphy, and Barry Graham. WUNC's Liz Schlemmer, Virginia Public Media's Jod Khalil, also Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.